This presentation is hosted on the Archon channel. Today we're looking into a single source that views a truly pivotal moment in history, not just as an ending, but as something that profoundly shaped identity for centuries.
That's right. We're exploring excerpts from an article titled En politi kleromi tis autokratorias to 1453 that translates roughly to the political legacy of the empire in 1453. It was published on newsfire.gr and written by Theodoros Giannakopoulos.
And this piece zooms right in, specifically on the political legacy of the Byzantine Empire through its very last emperor, Constantine Palaiologos, and of course the fall of Constantinople in 1453.
Exactly. So the mission for our discussion today is really to unpack this specific source's unique take on that historical event. How does this article present, one leader's final stand? His words, his actions, how did they transform a military loss into, something else entirely?
Something the author calls an enduring symbol, a definition of core values, even a cornerstone of national identity. It's quite a claim right from the start.
It really is. So we'll explore the values the article says he championed, how it portrays the enemy, the immense significance given to the city itself, and how this whole event, through his legacy, is presented as shaping consciousness for centuries after. And we're basing this strictly on this text.
Okay, let's get into this article's narrative then.
So, the author immediately puts us right there, on the night of May 28th, leading into the 29th, 1453. It's framed not simply as the date of the fall, but as the historical moment.
The moment when, through the emperor, the article claims the Greek race, or ageless Hellenism, articulated and renewed a timeless value.
That value being, as the piece describes it, the unyielding struggle for faith and fatherland. So the article presents this specific night as this profound act of self-definition through resistance.
And a key part of that, in how this article reads it, is the emperor's final address. The author's really emphatic. This wasn't just, a standard morale speech.
No, not at all. The article actually calls it a political and strategic will and prophecy, which is strong language for a final address.
It certainly is. And the piece suggests this speech was fundamentally about defining Hellenism, wasn't it? Nationally and culturally.
Right. Positioning Hellenism, according to this text anyway, between these two perceived constants. The immediate, very real threat from the East, and what the article characterizes as this sort of apathetic, self-interested lack of alliance or real help from the West.
Now, one striking point the article makes is about Constantine's specific stance, his refusal.
Absolutely. The author really highlights that. He refused to abandon the city, he wouldn't leave for safety, wouldn't negotiate, wouldn't surrender to the Turks. And this piece frames that as a conscious, almost exemplary political and national stance.
And the article gives a specific reason why he refused to hand over the city, suggesting it wasn't just stubbornness.
Right. The interpretation offered here is that he understood he didn't actually have the authority, not personally, not even as emperor, to just give the city away.
Like it wasn't his personal property to trade or bargain with?
That's exactly the article's point. It quotes him directly. To give this city to you is neither my right nor that of any of its inhabitants. So the city itself, as an idea,
stood above him,
Precisely. The author sees him as this combative but also realist leader. Someone who knew that losing the nation's honor, that was the real catastrophe.
Calling it a permanent disability, even worse than a temporary loss of territory.
And the article notes he acted knowing that Western help just wasn't coming. Or at least not unless orthodoxy paid a steep, unacceptable price.
Reflecting what the author presents as a collective will, the article quotes the Greek.
Right. Koen pepoputes autokorites apathynoming kos methamen sesos.
And the translation it emphasizes is essentially, it's our common decision to die voluntarily. We won't spare our lives.
So a conscious choice for death over a dishonorable survival. That's how the article reads this decision.
Okay, now here's where the article makes its really huge claim about his impact, his legacy across time.
Yes, it suggests that perhaps no other leader in history marked their people's national consciousness so deeply with their death. It's a bold claim. He's presented almost as a living link, connecting medieval Byzantium to modern Hellenism, especially during the long period of Ottoman rule.
So in this view, his figure didn't just vanish. It represented continuity, something alive, combative, always seeking liberation.
And this is where that legend comes in, the Marmoramenos Vasilius, the Marble King.
Ah, yes, the Marble King.
Exactly. The article argues that for over 4 centuries, his image wasn't forgotten. It wasn't distorted. It was elevated by the nation itself from history into this powerful symbol of resurrection.
Celebrated in songs, mourned in folk tales, this legendary figure sleeping somewhere,
Waiting, as the legend goes, to return, to retake the city and restore justice, with revenge reaching all the way to the red apple tree.
Another potent symbol in the folklore.
Very potent. And the article explicitly connects this legend to later historical events. It doesn't see them as separate. It links it to something like 70 different movements before the 1821 War of Independence, then territory gains up to 1913, even the 1919 Asia Minor campaign. These are presented not as isolated events, but as actions taken, as the author puts it, stepping in the shadow of this powerful existing legend.
So this figure, the Marble King, who has no state, no army, he becomes the nation itself, symbolically.
Right.
At least according to this piece.
That's the argument being made, yes. He embodies the nation when it lacks a physical state structure.
Which then leads to the article's point about Greek memory, specifically.
Yeah. It suggests this collective memory never, ever accepted his end as final. He was kept alive, as it were, as an awaiting ruler, which the author calls globally rare for a people's collective imagination, this persistence.
And he contrasts this with other groups from the former empire.
Yes, groups the article claims either forgot or adapted or even denied that Byzantine past.
But Hellenism, in this specific account, refused to accept his death. And, the author adds, justly elevated him to this permanent symbol of hope and eventual resurrection.
And this way of remembering, this holding on to the past so tenaciously, is what the article argues distinguishes the subjects of the empire from those it considers its owner's body and soul. Strong words again.
That distinction is key because it leads the author to push back quite hard against the idea of Byzantium as just this impersonal, multi-ethnic empire that was sort of imposed on Greeks.
Right. The article essentially throws down a challenge. Look at history, it says. Who actually mourned the fall?
And according to the text,
no other group that was part of the empire, Armenians, Syrians, Slavs, Italians, mourned in that same deep way.
The article claims they didn't sing laments for Hagia Sophia. They didn't imagine the Virgin Mary weeping for the city.
Didn't feel Constantine was their king, didn't keep the memory alive in that same sort of sacred, national, subconscious way. That's the claim.
Whereas the article insists only the Greek people for 5 centuries straight kept his name sacred, kept the fall alive as a memory.
And its reversal, the resurrection, as this constant yearning and promise.
And it makes that point about military leaders too, doesn't it?
It does. The author claims no Balkan, Caucasian, or Levantine leader, except Kolokotronis in 1821, saw themselves as continuing that specific struggle.
As the king's guard against the Turks, essentially. And Kolokotronis, listeners might know, was a huge figure in the Greek War of Independence.
Exactly. The article presents this comparison as pretty unique evidence for its central claim about Greek identity and memory.
Okay, let's maybe dig into the speech itself now, which the article calls his political testament, delivered right at the end, May 28th.
May 28th, 1453. Just as Mehmed II was apparently offering plunder to his troops. This speech in the article's reading wasn't just for the defenders there and then. It was aimed, supposedly, at future generations. Deeply political.
And the core message, as the author presents it, what does it boil down to?
Basically, don't forget who we are and don't forget who we're up against. The article quotes a really key passage.
Ah yes, the one that emphasizes 4 things.
That's the one. It translates the passage something like this. You know, brothers, that for 4 things we are commonly obligated, all of us, to prefer to die rather than to live. And those 4 are 1, faith and piety, 2, fatherland,
3, the king as the Lord's anointed, so legitimacy, the state itself, and 4, relatives and friends, family, community.
And then the conclusion from the speech. Therefore, brothers, if we are indebted to fight unto death for one of the 4, how much more are we for all of these?
So the article sees this as laying out a very clear hierarchy of values, things worth dying for.
Exactly. Faith, fatherland, legitimacy, state, family, community. And the argument derived from this is that survival itself is meaningless. Peace is worthless if faith or fatherland are compromised. These things demand the ultimate sacrifice.
Individually, sure, but even more so when they're all at stake together.
Right. And the author interprets this even further. National endurance isn't just about surviving. It's measured by the decision never to abandon these sacred things. The fighter who stands for all these is virtuous, and in this specific view, can't truly be defeated even in death.
The article also points out the language used about the enemy in the speech. Terms like wild boars, irrational animal, wicked mob, accursed emir.
Yeah, and the author doesn't just dismiss this as, standard wartime insults. The interpretation offered is that this language actually taps into a very ancient belief system. The idea of Romania Byzantium as a civilization of distinct individuals within a proper collective framework. As opposed to a senseless flock, which is how barbarians are perceived in this worldview presented by the source.
So Greeks and Romans are masters, barbarians are like animals fit for hunting. That's the framing the article extracts from the speech's language.
That's the framing presented in the article, yes. And this perceived superiority, according to the article's logic, means you don't treat them as equals. You certainly don't retreat or compromise for what would be seen as a shameful peace.
So it becomes a justification for total resistance.
That seems to be the logic the article extracts, yes.
And the city itself, Constantinople, dedicated to the Virgin Mary. How does Constantine define it according to this text?
Well, not just as a capital city or an administrative hub. The author argues he defined it as the symbolic heart of an entire cultural world, a world that stretched far beyond the empire's political borders at the time. Much like the article suggests, Hellenism today includes the diaspora and cultural influence globally.
So it's presented almost as a kind of Greco-Christian, mythical, timeless Avalon.
That's a good way to put it. A divinely guarded memory, a hope, the boast of the civilized world with Greeks at its center. That's the image painted.
And then there's that part the article calls the prophecy of the sacred places.
Ah, right. Where the speech describes the enemy wanting not just to enslave cities, but crucially to desecrate the holy churches.
Places where the Holy Trinity was worshipped, where angels sang, the fear was turning them into, what, blasphemous animal stables?
Exactly. And the author takes this very literally, calls it a literal prophecy fulfilled, pointing to things that happened then, but also claiming similar things happen today. It mentions specific examples like churches in Cyprus, Hagia Sophia's conversion, Kora Monastery, framing them as ongoing barbaric desecration.
So the threat from the east, in this interpretation of Palaiologos' words, wasn't just military. It was seen as existential.
Yes, absolutely. A threat to the entire cultural and spiritual identity. The article argues he fully understood the city's fall would mean a radical shift, turning this cultural center into a symbol of Islamic Eastern dominance, which the source views as inherently opposed to Greek values.
Right, so defending the city and its churches is framed here not as religious fanaticism, but as political self-awareness, choosing identity against oblivion, against forced adaptation, choosing who you are.
And finally, the article touches on the aspect of hope, that mix of divine help and human action.
Yeah, the author highlights how Constantine connects his faith directly with the strategy for national survival. It's definitely not presented as fatalism.
No, not just passively waiting for God to intervene alone. Divine synergy, the article calls it. That synergy is sought through the resistance of the besieged. The goal is for the enemy to leave in shame because of that combined effort, human effort, enabling divine aid.
So victory isn't just portrayed as some kind of miracle dropping out of the sky.
Right. It's presented as the result of forces. Political, military, moral. If the Greeks do their part, the humanly possible part, then, the article suggests, God allows the superhuman outcome, victory against the odds.
And this is where the article makes that connection to the present day, isn't it? Posing that question directly to you, the listener.
It does. It asks, are we today just relying on international bodies, alliances, maybe wishful thinking? Are we waiting for external cavalry, citing examples like Frontex, the French, Israelis, even Indians, waiting for them to save us?
Or are we maintaining that internal will, that capacity for national resistance and dignity that the article argues Palaiologos represented?
Exactly. The article concludes that Palaiologos didn't waste time blaming the enemy's aggression that was just a given, a fact of life. He focused on mobilizing his own people, getting them into a mindset of honor and, crucially, potential victory. Hope was genuinely placed in God, yes, but the responsibility.
The responsibility was squarely on the people themselves to act, to fight.
Precisely. And then his final act. It wasn't escape, was it?
No escape. The article stresses this. Didn't flee with treasure, wasn't rescued by some foreign power, didn't sign a treaty to become a vassal king, none of that.
He died fighting, right there on the wall.
Fell fighting. Died on the ramparts, his blood spilled, the article emphasizes, right at the gate of St. Romanos.
So through his words, and perhaps even more powerfully through that final action, the article argues he left something profound behind, not just a memory, but
his sword. symbolically, and the historical right to his imperial scepter that, in the article's phrasing, he entrusted to us, to the Greek people.
He didn't leave ruins, the article insists. He left symbols.
And not just mourning, but a sense of duty.
So in this very specific view of Greek historical memory presented by the article, the fall isn't actually framed as a defeat at all. It's framed as an oath.
An oath. And with his blood, the article claims, he anointed his people as successors and heirs.
And this whole legacy, this inheritance, how does the article describe it finally?
As a war wound.
A war wound, a permanent mark, a scar, something proudly born in collective memory and soul, not something to be resented or erased.
Because, as the article finishes, our very soul cannot lie far from us.
It's a very powerful and very specific framing presented in this article by Giannakopoulos.
Okay, so if we try to pull back and look at the big picture take, drawing strictly from the source we've been discussing, what is it?
Well, according to this text, this article by Theodoros Giannakopoulos, the story of Constantine Saculep and the fall of Constantinople in 1453 it's far more than just the end of an empire. Much more.
Yeah, it's really presented as a foundational moment, isn't it? One that forged core values and defined an enduring identity for the Greek people, lasting centuries.
His final stand, the values embedded in that final speech, his death on the walls, all of it transformed, in this author's specific view, a historical catastrophe into this potent, living symbol.
A symbol of continuity, and resistance.
Yeah.
And a kind of perpetual call to duty that the article says echoed down through legend and historical movements for hundreds of years.
It's definitely a perspective that completely reframes the fall, not as an endpoint, not as a defeat, but as an oath. An oath inherited through his sacrifice, shaping national consciousness in what the source argues is a unique way.
And that final image the author uses, it really is striking, isn't it? This inherited legacy as a war wound, a scar.
Right. Not something shameful or hidden away, but something carried proudly, something integral to identity itself, inseparable, as the source puts it, from the collective soul.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, based on where this particular source leaves us. If the fall is seen not as a defeat, but as an oath, and if this inherited legacy is like a scar that's part of the very soul, how do historical wounds like that and the duties people feel are passed down through generations actually shape how a people sees itself today, and perhaps where it believes it's heading in the future?
That's definitely something to ponder. How much does that deep past, framed in this very particular way by this author, continue to resonate with you?